Hi, everybody. You're reading with Jimmy. This is Jimmy. We're going to analyze Hamlet, Act 4. We're going to do a summary background and interpretation of what we just read in Act 4 of Hamlet. So here's what happened. In Act 4, Scene 1, Fortinbras shows up marching to Poland, and Hamlet has some thoughts about war and men dying and why he is hesitating to kill Claudius. So he's still waiting around for divine inspiration. No, I'm kidding. But he's not executing immediately. In Scene 2, the queen shows up with Horatio, who brings in Ophelia, and she has changed, hasn't she? She's singing now. So when you talk to her, she answers by singing. And madness is really upon her. She's kind of like flipped with everything going on around her. And then the king shows up and he mentions that Laertes has secretly come from France, who then shows up. So Laertes then shows up with soldiers to take over the kingdom after his father was killed and he wasn't given the proper rights and all that stuff. So he wants to know who killed his father and he wants revenge. Sound familiar? So even though the queen says it wasn't her husband that killed Polonius, he still wants to know, but the king doesn't tell him. Ophelia re-enters, and don't forget, Ophelia is Laertes' sister, and she's singing, and everything is fine. And so Laertes sees her and is touched. He's moved. So he doesn't really take over the kingdom, but Claudius encourages Laertes, just be patient. We'll figure this out. Now, you know already that Claudius and the queen both know who killed Polonius, but Claudius is not telling Laertes yet. In Scene 3, Horatio gets some letters written by Hamlet from a sailor for the king. He also gets a letter from Hamlet saying that he was taken by pirates. So that's what happened when he was on his way to England. We'll find out more about that in Act 4. But really, you know, it's not all that seems to be. Just keep that in mind if you haven't finished the play yet. So Horatio gets some letters for the king. The king tells Laertes that Hamlet killed Polonius. Finally, in Scene 4, he reveals this, and then Laertes swears revenge. I got to do it. So now you have an interesting juxtaposition. You have Hamlet, whose father was killed by Claudius, and now you have Laertes, whose father was killed by Hamlet. So both Hamlet and his uncle are killers of fathers. It's interesting. A messenger brings in a letter from Hamlet to the king and the queen, and the king plots with Laertes to kill Hamlet. The plan involves poisons. So remember, Hamlet is on the way to England, right? And he believes that he'll be killed in England. But if not, he's got this plan here, right? That he was taken by pirates and he's going to come, quote unquote, naked in England. And so he's hatching another plan with Laertes to kill Hamlet that involves poison. One on Laertes' rapier, which he plays with Hamlet. They're going to have a fencing contest. And then the other in a drink, so that when Hamlet needs a break, he can drink the poison just in case the rapier doesn't work. Laertes doesn't nick Hamlet, right? He doesn't nick, you'll see, in case he doesn't nick Hamlet. Anyway, that's in Act 5. The queen comes in and tells them Ophelia has drowned. Holy mackerel. Okay? So the plot, in Act 3, we saw that he caught the king. The king did kill his father. He's figuring out how to kill the king. Hamlet goes to see his mother, kills Polonius. And in Act 4, the plot thickens as the king tells Laertes that Hamlet killed his father and then hatches a plot to kill Hamlet in the fencing competition. And Ophelia lost her mind, and then she drowns. So I want to touch on Ophelia for a moment. Poor Ophelia. And while there are many characters in this play, perhaps none are used to the extent that Ophelia is used. We know, for example, that she's a good daughter because she obeys her father Polonius when he tells her to avoid Hamlet in the beginning. But then he changes his mind after Hamlet starts acting mad after his encounter with the ghost. He thinks that basically Hamlet is love struck with Ophelia. So that's why he went a little off the record. off the reservation. No, whatever. We will see before the play ends that Hamlet loved Ophelia and that his mother Gertrude wanted her to marry him. That's a little foreshadowing in Act 5. So it's quite possible that what Polonius thought was not out of the realm of reason, that in fact Hamlet really loved Ophelia, Ophelia really loved Hamlet, and for some reason they were torn asunder. Okay? So Ophelia is literally torn apart with the demands made on her, pulling her this way, that way, that way, causing probably a lot of stress, and then she just flips. Especially when Hamlet has his encounter with her in the prior act. Remember that? Truly, for the power of beauty will sooner transform honesty from what it is to a bawd than force of honesty can translate beauty into likeness. This was sometime a paradox, but now the time gives it proof. I did love you once. When Hamlet says that, he's saying that, does he really mean that? Remember, you're deciding if Hamlet is mad or not. So, I did love you once. Is he saying that just to keep her away from him while he's on his mission of revenge? Or does he stop loving her? It's hard to say right now. Ophelia says, indeed, my lord, you made me believe so. Hamlet, you should not have believed me. For virtue cannot so inoculate our old stock, but we shall relish of it. I loved you not. I was the more deceived, says Ophelia. Hamlet, get thee to a nunnery. Why wouldst thou be a breeder of sinners? I am myself indifferent honest, but I could accuse, etc. Okay? Hamlet, let the doors be shut upon him that he may play the fool nowhere but in his own house. Farewell. Ophelia, help him, you sweet heaven. She's saying, help Hamlet. If thou dost marry, Hamlet says, I give thee this plague for thy dowry. Be thou as chaste as ice, as pure as snow, thou shalt not escape calumny. Get thee to a nunnery, go, farewell. Or if thou wilt needs, marry, if you have to marry, marry a fool. For wise men know well enough what monsters you make of them. It kind of worked both ways. To a nunnery go, and quickly too, farewell. Oh, heaven restore him. So she thinks he's just talking out of his mind, right? I've heard of your paintings too well enough. God has given you one face, and you make yourselves another. You jig, you amble, you lisp, and you nickname God's creatures, and you make your wantonness your ignorance. Go, too, I'll no more of it. It hath made me mad. I say we will have no more marriages. Those that are married already, all but one shall live. I wonder who that is. The rest shall keep as they are. To a nunnery, go. And then he leaves. Ophelia. Oh, what a noble mind is here overthrown. The courtiers, soldiers, scholars, eye, tongue, sword, the expectancy and rose of the fair state, the glass of fashion and the mold of form. The observe them, all observers, quite down. And I, of ladies most deject and wretched, that suck the honey of his music vows, I now see that noble and most sovereign reason, like sweet bells jangled out of tune and harsh. That unmatched form and feature of blown youth, blasted with ecstasy, oh, woe is me, to have seen what I have seen and see what I see. This is a cry right here for help, and she's in agony because he let her, in her mind now, he led her on, with his musical, with his voice. So is it any wonder she eventually flips and there's tragedy, and then there's the tragedy of her death. And you remember how she died. She fell off a tree. She came in the one scene and was singing her answers, and they all knew there's something wrong with her, right? And they all thought it's because she loved Hamlet, and Hamlet was also crazy. So she went crazy. Pardon me. Character is the second most important to plot in our organization of tragedy. You remember that? So in Act 4, we learn about each of the characters through their dialogue and actions, like we do in every act, right? So why is this important? To determining the reliability of the actors, as this is third-person narration. So I want to summarize the actors now in terms of their character development and their reliability. So Claudius is increasingly seen as evil. He killed Hamlet's father. He's plotting to kill Hamlet. He plots with Laertes to kill Hamlet, just in case those, they didn't get him in England, and it looks like they didn't. So now he's plotting with Laertes to kill Hamlet. He plays Laertes like a violin. What does that mean, Jimmy? Let me tell you. Let's read. Claudius. Laertes, was your father dear to you? Or are you like a painting of sorrow, a face without a heart? So he's telling Laertes, did you love your father? Or are you just full of doo-doo? Why you ask this? Why ask you this? And then he launches into a speech about how time affects a person's love, right? Oh my God, we read that carefully, right? Finishing with Hamlet comes back. What would you undertake to show yourself your father's son in deed, more than words? To cut his throat in the church, says Laertes. Okay, so he plays to Laertes' loss of his father Polonius, who Laertes now knows was killed by Hamlet. And he's setting them up to plot with him to make sure that he will kill Hamlet, since obviously he didn't make it to England. Pirates took it, right? We'll find that out if we didn't find that out already. And so Laertes, the king, is, to me, is just an evil guy and very difficult to be believed in anything he says. But if you read between the lines, you can see that he's a manipulator. Now, I told you when we started this play, you read to see how other people lead their lives. I'm not saying you should be a manipulator, but I am saying if you're old enough, you've probably met manipulators. And that's what Claudius is doing to Laertes. He's manipulating him into a passionate hatred, even more so than is natural to hate the guy who killed your father. But he's an instigator, right? And Hamlet, well, Hamlet is the central character in the title of the play, and so he's tasked with revenge by the ghost. He plays the madman. I'm convinced, Jimmy's convinced, that he's always acting mad, although he's pretty passionate, and he does. Jimmy, what about when he stabbed Polonius? You could say that he lost it. He acted passionately and spared a moment when he stabbed that, but I don't think so. I think the conclusion, and Hamlet is very logical and reasoning. He thinks things through. He figured whoever behind that curtain has to be the king. That's why he said rat, and he was surprised it was Polonius, and he called him a fool after he killed him. And anyway, he disguises his feelings, but it's too late because Claudius is already figuring out. He probably knows, since he caught the conscience of the king in that play, right? So he will also see he's smart enough to dodge his uncle's attempt on his life with sealed orders that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are carrying to English to have him executed. You're going to see that, but more about that later. So Hamlet, complex, they're all complex characters, but Hamlet in particular is very complex because he's tasked with the truth, meaning that the ghost tells him, my brother killed me, now you got to kill my brother. That's a lot to put on a person's shoulders, Oh, Jimmy, what happened to forgiveness? Well, that's a good question. Who asked that? What happened to forgiveness? Can you forgive someone for murder? That's an interesting question. Let's think about that. Polonius, the Lord Chamberlain, was kind of a foolish person. He's full of wisdom and he's got good intentions, but he really is kind of like a busybody. You see from some of the dialogue he has with Hamlet, you're a fishmonger. What do you know me, sir? He doesn't know. He's just a good intentioned fool. Do you know people like that? that have great intentions and end up doing something really stupid, like hiding in the queen's room behind a curtain. In any case, killing him as a madman is different than killing him for revenge to people around him, right? He kills them and they blame his madness. He blames his madness. You'll see later on. But he basically, that's really Polonius himself. He's got a lot of good advice for his son, which Laertes more or less may or may not have followed, but he's just a good guy who's in the wrong place at the wrong time. Horatio, I think, is an very interesting character. He's a friend to Hamlet. And this character turns out to be basically a solid, true friend. Remember that one passage we read? If, a passionless friend is really good, keep him close. He's steady. And really, of all the characters, he has the pieces of the tragedy to sum up at the end. He knows what's going on from the time the ghost was seen by him to the time he swore the oath with the ghost to watch with Hamlet. He's close to, he's Hamlet's buddy and a good friend. And actually a character that probably doesn't have too many flaws. Anyway, Laertes is the son to Polonius, and he's full of passion, not really focused, right? He gives his sister some advice and act before he leaves for France, but he's pretty passionate. He's not really focused per se. And losing his father and sister has a profound effect on his actions, which actually being played like Claudius and he plot to kill Hamlet. He loses perspective, let's say. Then you have these other minor characters, but important to the development of the plot. These people come and go in the plot, especially Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who are charged with taking Hamlet to England. He's got this guy Orsic, true to form, he's a courtier. Not much about him here, but in the next act he'll show up. These guys were only in the first act. This guy was only in the first act. Renato was only in the first act or second. And then you have these players. All of these people are important to the development of the plot, but they don't have an in-depth character. We don't get to know them as well as we do the other characters, like Hamlet or the King or Ophelia. These are just people here to help the narrator, third-person narrator, move the plot along. Then you have Fortinbras, a minor character, but still important, and then Gertrude. So she's sort of a lost soul, I think, marrying her husband's brother so quickly, but we never really know why. We can speculate why, but we never really know why. There's nothing in her dialogues, in her monologues, that tell us why she married. I don't think, unless you find something, you email me, Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. But I don't think there's much in her recorded dialogues with everybody to say why she did this so fast. Some people say the motive behind Gertrude and Claudius' relationship is unclear and open for interpretation. You can Google. Sometimes when you're analyzing a book, you can go to Google and ask Google the questions, and Google will serve up a bunch of answers for you to consider. But remember, whatever you're reading, don't rely on just whoever's telling you this stuff, including Jimmy. Don't just listen to me, what I'm saying here. Learn it for yourself. Dig in for yourself. Interpret it for yourself. Don't rely on other people per se. Make sure if somebody says something, like, for example, I don't know why Gertrude got married so quickly, that you can prove that to yourself. Or if you go back and you reread the play, you can say, here's why. Here's why. I cannot find that. Why? So when I did that on Google, it says, if audiences are to believe that Gertrude is driven by lust, then her promiscuity may be the reason for the swift marriage. Whoever wrote that is probably, has got his head up his butt, because I don't see Gertrude driven by lust. Do you? Did you see anywhere in there in the play so far? Now we're only on Act 4, but up the first 4 acts, I do not see Gertrude as a lustful person, that she's not driven by lust. So whoever wrote this is just pulling this out of he's full of hot air because he's pulling it out of the air. There's no evidence that Gertrude is full of lust. And that's why she married so swiftly. You don't have to get married if you're lustful. You understand? You do not have to get married if you're full of lust. However, the political nature of the relationship is to be considered as well. Okay, she was the queen, right? And she still would be the queen, but then who was the heir apparent to be the king? Respectfully, it was Hamlet. Would you agree with that? He's the son of the king. He's next in line when the king passes. Hamlet was not there when his father died. Aha, says you. Now it's starting to be clear, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? Hamlet wasn't there. Claudius took advantage of the moment and got Gertrude to marry him, so now he's the king. He's the king. Hamlet's still the heir, but now he's the king because he married the queen. Aha. So now let's speculate. Let's be Google ourselves. Why didn't she wait for Hamlet to come back so he could be the king? He was going to be crowned the king. Probably because he's the son of the king. Right? And the people don't know that the king died and that he was murdered. He died in his sleep because he had poison poured in his ear. Right? So there's lots of layers to this story. But what you and I, as readers and thinkers and people who want to understand and study literature are concerned, we have to stay within the bounds of the story. So we really don't know why she married him so quickly, but we do know through the actions that he did marry her so that Hamlet was barred from becoming the king. He's the king now until such a time as he dies, and then Hamlet, comes to the throne. He's the heir apparent. So even when his mother when he dresses his mother down after killing Polonius, there's no evidence that of any of this. She's saying after he's dressing her down, Hamlet, speak no more. You turn my eyes into my very soul, and there I see such black and grain spots as will not leave their tint, right? They're going to stain her. Because he's telling her what's going on. And she's saying, please don't speak no more. He says, no, nay, but to live. In the rank sweat of enseamed bed, stewed in corruption, honeying, making love over the nasty sty. Pigsty, right? Speak no more, she's saying. She's begging Hamlet, stop. These words are like daggers in my ears. No more, sweet Hamlet. A murderer and a villain and a slave that is not the 20th part of the tithe of your precedent lord, a vice of kings, a curt spur of the empire and the rule that from a shelf the precious diadem stole and put it in his pocket. See, he took away the inheritance of him. Please, no more. A king of shreds and patches. And then the ghost comes in because he's really hammering her, right? He's driving her really. He's just hammering her with the truth. There you know why the saying, the truth hurts. She doesn't want to hear anymore. She can't handle the truth. So the ghost comes in and he says, basically, tells Hamlet to focus on what he was told him to do. In other words, take revenge on Claudius. Leave your mother alone. And if you remember the words, the ghost says, can't you see she's amazed at what the heck you're talking about? She doesn't know what you're talking about. So that, to me, when you look at this and you read some of these interpretations of Gertrude, you can't say that. If you're going to write a paper on Gertrude's character and you're going to talk to Jimmy and write an essay and send him by email an essay about Gertrude, what are you going to say about her? That's really if you were going to write an essay about any of these people, what are you going to say about them? You can only say about them what is based on the facts of the case, which is the story. In this scene, he's hammering her with what he knows as true because the ghost told him. He had the play to confirm it. But he's the only one, besides Horatio, that really knows what the heck is going on here. Okay? So the ghost basically shows up. She doesn't remember. She does not hear or see the ghost. Only Hamlet sees the ghost, and he just says, just listen, son, just do what I told you to do. Leave your mother alone. Ophelia, the daughter of Polonius, is a sad character. What can we say about her? The characters are developed. These characters are developed, but they're not developed intently. They're just developed with a word here, a word there, a sentence there, right? Ophelia is just a young girl who loved Hamlet. Hamlet paid attention to her, and then suddenly he changed. He changed. Now, if you've ever been the target of unrequited love, you know what's happened. You know what it feels like. I hope you know what it feels like. Now, if you haven't, if you've been lucky and, you've been loved all your life and you love all your life, congratulations. Send me an email. Tell me how happy you are. But most people go through this unrequited love until you learn what love really means. Do you know what love really means? Ernest Hemingway, which we're going to read one day, and A Farewell to Arms, has a character in there. It's the nurse and then Lieutenant Henry. But I think the nurse's name is Barclay, if I recall correctly. And they're talking one day, and it's a love story, kind of. And she says, there is no me. There's only you, when they're talking about love. I want you to think about that. There is no me. There is only you. Hermann Hesse wrote another story, Damien. It's called Damien. It's a book. Hermann Hesse. We're going to read some Hermann Hesse, I think. In any case, the way love is defined there is that love must not entreat. You cannot force it. You can't force love. You can't force much of anything unless you got a whip. No, I'm kidding. So love must not entreat. There is no me. There's only you. That's really what this is. So obviously Ophelia loved Hamlet. I think he loved her. We're going to find that out in the next act. But then because of the charge that his father, the ghost, gave him for revenge, he had to stop that. He put the revenge in front of love. So when you yourself start playing with blocks and you do your Lego and I put revenge in front of this and that in front of those and things like that, you're doing it logically, but love is kind of like a passionate thing. Passionate love. Not emotional love, but passionate love. We were talking about emotions, love, hate. Remember the emotion discussion we had? So when you're governed by passion, there is no logic or reason to what you do, which is actually how Hamlet killed Polonius. And anyway, the ghost of Hamlet's father just keep in mind, this is a story about love. And if you really think about it, it's a story about Hamlet's deep love for his father. He had deep love for his father. Above all else, that's why he's on this revenge kick. Because his father told him the truth of how he died. And he says, go, you gotta help me get even here, buddy. Would you do that? Would you do that for someone you loved? So this is an underestimated important character. Now, before we go, I want to point out a couple of things about language that are used in Act 4. So you'll always see the language when we're reading with these exclamation points, that the language is there. And the reason I like language is not only because Aristotle talked about diction, which is language of a play, but also since we don't really talk like this anymore, it's important to read this and think about it because Maybe that's how we should talk about things rather than just thinking in our plain little iPhone world. How all occasions do, so Hamlet's alone when he's saying this, do inform against me and spur my dull revenge. So he thinks everything's working against him. What is man if his chief good and market of his time be but to sleep and feed? All I do is get up and go to work and come home and I eat. All I do is, have you heard people complain about that? Have you heard people say, oh man, all I do is work. Oh God. Of course, nowadays it's different ever since COVID, right? People don't work anymore. They don't really have that drive. I told you Jimmy's sign in his office, a day without work is a day without food. I told you that. If I didn't, there it is. I have a sign every day I wake up. I come to my little office and there's a sign. A day without work is a day without food. Okay, so it makes sense. But see, I've really never worked in my life because I've always been very blessed and to do what I want to do, like this, what I'm doing now with you. What is man if his chief good and market of his time is but to sleep and feed? A beast. That's what he is, no more. Well, Jimmy, we're not animals, we're human beings. Well, here's a flash for you. We're animals. We're part of the animal kingdom. And we need to eat. You know, you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Well, maybe we'll talk about that one day. So we have to eat in order to survive. But if that's all you do is sleep and eat and you don't do anything else, you're a beast, right? Sure, he that made us with such large discourse, God, looking before and after, gave us not that capability and godlike reason to fuss it on us unused. God didn't give us our brains not to use them. In other words, to just just sit there. He gave us our reason to think. Well, Jimmy, I don't believe in God. Forget about it then. Don't listen. Don't listen to this. But ask yourself, why are you thinking? Why are you given the gift of reason? You don't have to believe God gave it to you. Somebody did. It's called evolution, if you'd like to go down that road. So you've evolved to have this reasoning in your head, right? Well, dogs reason. Sure they do, but not like us, do they? Do they? Okay. Now, whether it be bestial oblivion or some craven scruple of thinking too precisely on the event. Okay, maybe I'm an animal, or maybe I'm thinking too much on the event. What's the event? Revenge. A thought which quartered hath but one part wisdom and ever 3 parts coward. See, if you think too much about something and you don't do it when you're supposed to do it, maybe you are, in fact, a coward. Conscience makes cowards of us all. I think he's going to say that shortly, right? Or if not, here, somewhere else. I do not know why yet I live to say the things to do. I don't know why I'm still here and still saying I have to kill my uncle. He's still arguing with himself. You see what I'm saying? Sith, I have cause and will and strength and means to do it. He's got everything he needs to do it. Examples gross as earth exhort me. There's plenty of examples. Witness this army of such mass and charge led by a delicate and tender prince, Fortinbras, right? Whose spirit with divine ambition puffed makes mouths at the invisible event, exposing what is mortal and unsure to all that fortune, death, and danger dare, even for an eggshell. Remember the conversation they had about the patch of land, and that all you're going to have all these deaths and all that stuff for just a worthless piece of land. Rightly to be great is not to stir without great argument. but greatly to find quarrel in a straw when honor is at stake. In other words, don't insult me, I'll fight you over a piece of dirt. You see, they find quarrel. They're going to argue about nothing. How stand I then that have a father killed, a mother stained, excitements of my reason and my blood, and let all sleep? In other words, I'm really more stressed than any of this stuff that's going on. I got, my father's dead, my mother's stained, I got all this stuff going on. While to my shame, I see the imminent death of 20,000 men that for a fantasy and a trick of fame go to their graves like beds and fight for a plot whereon the numbers cannot try to cause, which is not tomb enough to contend and continent to hide the slain. There's not enough dirt to bury all these people. He's talking about battles, right? Where hundreds of, sometimes thousands of men. If you know your history, and you should really learn your history, any kind of war that takes, it's sometimes bloody. Like if you look at World War I, which was trench warfare, it's amazing. It's just amazing what people do to people, and that's what Hamlet's contemplating. And from this time forth, my thoughts be bloody, or be worth nothing. So he finally says, that's it. I got to do this. I've got to do this. It's not evident in here, but basically he's making an argument that can be found later in philosophy in Nietzsche, and also actually in Nietzsche, but also in Dostoevsky, about the Superman, the person who has little or no conscience, where he can order, hundreds of thousands of people to their death, a general, for example. I'm not saying that General Eisenhower, a great man, didn't have a conscience. I'm not saying he didn't do that, but he's the guy who pulls trigger. And there's generals throughout history. Just read your history. Julius Caesar, there's a theory that Nietzsche evolved and Dostoevsky evolved about people who don't have a conscience that could order other people to death. Whereas if you think about it, ordering one person to his death is a big deal. This is not the time for that discussion, but you should be thinking about it because Hamlet's thinking about it. Hamlet is thinking about this. Why can't I kill my uncle? He's one guy. There's 20,000 guys that are going to die over here in Poland. Why can't I kill my uncle? You see what I'm saying? And that's not to mean to say that Fortinbras that you're going to meet and the guy who's doing battle with the Polish he's a man without a conscience. That doesn't mean that necessarily. Stay within the bounds of this and just try to experience what Hamlet is thinking. The queen says, let him come in, exit Horatio. To my sick soul, as sin's true nature, this is a different scene. Each toy seems prologue to some great amiss. Each toy, each event, each thing that's happening seems to be a prologue to some great amiss. Something, it's called foreshadowing. So full of artless jealousy is guilt. It spills itself in fearing to be spilled. There's those two words that end. I told you they end sometimes in rhymes, right? So full of artless jealousy is guilt that it spills itself in fearing to be spilled. Think about just these two simple lines. Guilt, we're talking about guilt. You can't feel guilt unless you have a conscience. You have to have a conscience, which means if you have a conscience, you have defined right and wrong. Otherwise, if you have not defined right and wrong, you don't have a conscience. If you don't have a conscience, this right here, guilt, it's impossible to feel it. Okay. Now, I know people, I think you know people who feel guilt. I was brought up in Catholic religion, which was riddled with guilt. I got stories. And is it a good thing? Well, the Queen is saying, so full of artless jealousy. Jealousy. That's a passion, isn't it? That's a feeling when you're jealous. So it's artless jealousy. It's not even rational jealousy. It's just jealous. It's guilt. That guilt spills itself in fearing to be spilled. So if you have guilt and you're afraid to expose your guilt, it spills itself. Think about this. The guilty really spill the guilt themselves when they're afraid because they have guilt. So in other words, if you really can't feel guilt if you don't want to spill your guilt. Because if you're guilty, you're going to spill your guilt. I could talk another hour about those two sentences, but I'm not going to do that. You've been reading with Jimmy. Isn't this a great graphic to show Laertes and Claudius plotting? Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon for the last act. Stay tuned.